Sometimes I leave a lot of this material or this visual information to uh, my grandmother, Karen M. McDonald, because she certainly covered a lot of this with Patty Broussard on Project Ascension about genetic engineering, codes, instruction sets, programming language, base programming language, and all that kind of stuff. So I just sort of insert holographically, um, sort of from my own experiences, okay? Because I'm very, very familiar with this subject matter codes, particularly when it comes to fallen states of consciousness based on a free will universal template, right? That was generated connecting to the eternal Son, the One, which is eternal love, which is eternal spirit of fire. And it is the eternal spirit of fire that purifies, right? The spirit, which purifies and acts as a firewall, a crystalline shield firewall to protect the codes. Now we're into encryption and decryption to access the codes. Now you can understand the importance as it relates to breeding experiments, forced breeding, implants, and particularly when it comes to the old famous camera eye. Taking a picture of the codes, capture the codes, artificial light, capturing the codes. Right? That's called data mining, which is DNA data mining, right? So there's a lot of sidebar issues with this, like graphing, quantum probability function graphing, exposing to this, exposing to that. Now you want superhuman, AI, integrated intelligence, machinery, enter super soldiers. So you need a camera eye. And now you can sort of put into this what's called stealth code. Okay. Pre-matter phase consciousness and matter phase consciousness. They can't take a picture of the codes to access the locks and access the keys because they've changed. You know, like here's a simple example that you can learn through our own experience, right? When the owner came out here to this house here on the Big Island in Lapa Hoi Hoi, and if you know the history of this place, why Lapa Hoi Hoi might have an interest on behalf of what love is with bad energy vortexes, right? And why Miss Patty Broussard mentioned that the Big Island was a Draco stronghold, right? And then plug into that codes, breeding experiments, right? I did a couple of videos on my Rose Sweet channel about the female mitochondria, visual information codes, visual mathematical codes, and really it's just as simple as a library, a circulation library, which is a breathing system, breathing in and out codes, breathing in and out God's code. The eternal spirit of fire, code 1. That's why Patty mentioned one time it goes inert, won't fire. That's the highest level of creative intelligence there is. And why it's sort of an oxymoron. And I mentioned to this grandmother, you're not ever going to be able to run this software unless you're running stealth code. Okay? And now we're back to the most obvious, which means if you want to run it, that's cool. Because it means that you are what we are. So if you are what love is, which is what we are, you can run the software. Otherwise, it won't work. Why? Because there's a speed requirement, which is known as a core, which means you can't fake it using synthetic technology and what the Anunnaki did, trying to duplicate a key, duplicate a frequency. We used to call that faking you out, masqueraders, right? Trying to fake it. Remember the old saying, if you can't make it, you got to fake it. Now we're back to when I was a little child. Pull that mask off. Who are you really? You don't need to hide from us. What are you in fear of? Right? Exposure. Expose the film. Expose the negative. Right? For what it really is. Because it lives in fear. Now we're back to the word that I use called deflection. See? When somebody has a sick mind, okay, and a lot of us have all had experiences with this, right? In which it refuses to accept responsibility for the acts of its own consciousness, which means it's just like what I experience here in this house with the folks that are living here, okay? They don't need a lecture from me on what it is that they'd use their nuclear reactor for to blow holes in their own nuclear reactor. Even at the lowest level of intelligence, it's going to realize by the result of what it's doing, what it's experiencing, that it's learning from. So what that essentially means is that they're held captive to their own self-destructive behaviors. Okay? I'm not them, so I can't help that. I can't be what they are to fix that. They have to be what they are to fix that. Right? Okay? That's called accountability. Because that's how it works in a free will universe. Because if you're not able to repair yourself as a result of what we introduce, right, as if you will, and the way that works is a non-repairable. And when you get into the accountability that if you're grown up and you take responsibility, which means having virtue and having honor and being honest with yourself, right? Which means if you can't be honest with at least yourself, then how can you be honest with anybody else if you don't even know who the hell you are? Enter MK Ultra. That was the point. They don't know which one they are. How many do they have? Turn one on, like a chatty Cathy doll, like a chat bot. Activate the switch. Activate the code. Now you get a chat bot that all of a sudden kills 40 people. That's why you have so much of this stuff going on right now. These are all counter-space moves. It doesn't want to lose, the tug of war. Push-pull, right? I can't lose that spiral. I can't lose that spiral. I can't lose that spiral. I can't lose God's spiral. If I lose God's spiral, I implode. I can't lose God's spiral. I'll implode. Then surrender to God. Surrender to yourself. Now you can experience what God is, which is what love is, which is what light is. It goes on forever. Gifting electrons, right? So this is where we get into free will and not taking responsibility for the acts of another. Because that's what free will is. So now we're back into learning, right? And learning curve and learning speed curve and curve space vectors. Folding space and time. How fast are you going? Hypersensitivity, right? Like, I was very sensitive. And the more sensitive you are, the more aware you are of what's going on. And when you're super, hyper sensitive, then it means that your antenna, right, is picking up on all the frequencies that others don't pick up on. So now we're talking about antennas, receptors, stereo receivers, able to pick up the signal, which is a signet. How sensitive are we? Right? So you know that an eternal God, an eternal Son, has the ability to do what? Map every frequency. To know if the codes are activating or fired, or if you will, how the central nervous system is operating as an operating system, whether or not it's repairable. Right? Or what's known as non-repairables. because the codes simply will not activate because they're too badly damaged. Okay, I think Patty mentioned one time about reseeding, which basically means we got to give them a new operating system. They need new software. The computer that they were running just got way too damaged. Biocomputer, right? So in the manufacturing industry, we used to call those red tagging, right? Take it back to the engineering department in the customer service and have some tech operator take a look at it, and run a scan on the codes, right? Find out what happened, right? Now that would be in the domain of the cyborgs and the android sort of stuff, because those are easy to repair, right? But you can see how that works when we get into the whole idea of what's sort of being routed in traffic, right, between antennas now and mass media, particularly when Bill O'Reilly was talking about artificial intelligence. And I can remember, because I grew up during the era of the 1950s and 60s when you had organized labor. So you know what self-organized formations of consciousness is, right? Organize the information, which is to organize the data, because you're building a library and you're keeping it organized, right? So you're not running chaos, which means the way the synapses work between the opening and closing of the magnetic circuits, how precise are those codes firing at a high rate of speed, so all you're getting the full functionality of a high-performance unit, right? So now we're into reset, reboots, right? The original codes of a universal and galactic template, knowing how to light yourself on fire, right? To experience the eternal spirit of fire, right? That's a hard reset. Lighting yourself on fire, the eternal spirit of fire. So, there's a spirit of fire in a volcano, right? So they fear that, sadly, because that eternal spirit of fire is what purifies the heart and soul, right? Gets rid of all the waste product at a very high rate of speed. That's bioregenesis, right? Which is healing, voltage healing, right? Experiencing more of what God gives us for free. Primal sound field, electrified sound, right? Electrical current, light, joined as one, right? One badass blast furnace, eternal spirit of fire, right? So when you get into sort of the breeding experiment side of this, and I've shared in one of my videos going back to Rose, with my hands going up and down like this, about knowing what to breed with, what not to breed with, which would be one, if you will, unit of consciousness that is running software. Okay, so now you're scanning somebody else's codes or their software. You want to breed with that software package, right? So you see how this sort of works. And the reason that this is very important has to do with key codes and access codes to locks and gates. Particularly when you get into the idea of why certain genetic engineering was performed in order to create a race that would be the guardians, right, of a galactic and universal template, right? Which means they would have to be able to run the codes with what? A very high rate of precision, so that they can be wherever they need to be in order to do repairs, right? And so you might think of us as Caltrans. You know what Caltrans is, right? So if the grid goes down, or a part of that highway, the interstate highway, goes down as a result of, they're getting 20 feet of snow every 30 minutes, right? Or a mudslide, right? Or something happened Mount St. Helens. You got to keep that traffic going, right? Particularly in a planet that's got a money system running. Now you're into the exchange rate, which is water distribution tables, which are log scales between electrons, right? Loss and gain, so that we maintain the balance in the poles, right? So now we're back to the polarity stuff, right? Between negative and positive polarity, right? Just like the game tonight with the Warriors. San Francisco Warriors, NBA, the semifinals of the Western Conference. Look at the ending score. okay, in May, right? What is it, May 6th? The ending score results in 3. That's 9. Number 9. I know, even my own Verizon bill, okay, which was due today, that's what they said, due, okay? And guess how much my Verizon account is to pay? I pay on a monthly basis. A 55 harmonic. That's a black hole. Pay the black hole, right? Push electrons into that black hole. Give the Verizon black hole, you know, the quantum inorganic deadlight magnet. It needs electrons. Keep feeding electrons. It wants 55 electrons. Give it what it's need. That's what it's asking for, right? So now I just lost $55 worth of electrons, right? Feeding the vampire. That's what it is. Feed the vampire, right? So you're being nice. See, with me, ever since I was a child, and I've actually communicated with other, when I give you money, it's a gift. Okay, and why is that? Because there's no guarantee you're ever going to give it back to me anyway. And besides that, it's already gone. You're putting it back into circulation. All right, now we're back into circulation libraries and building libraries of bioplasma. What's held in memory? What's holding us captive? Now we're back to those that refuse to release all their electrons. How many electrons are they holding captive? Well, look at the guy that owns the Los Angeles Chargers. Now we're into biometric accounts, right? You think this guy is ever going to be able to pay back all the electrons that he stole from everybody else that was a slave as a battery to what it is that he does, be out of his sphere, to let go? Now you can get into space and space arcs and how much they were charging 200 years ago to occupy that space arc, and how much electrons was required of us to be able to occupy that space over a given time-space continuum on the timelines that we were aware of that were running through our biocomputers, right? Versus only one wave, the 0-1, diamagnetic zero, right? Which is pre-phase matter state consciousness, because you're not on the matter yet. Inside, outside. How fast is that happening? Remember the old saying when we were little kids playing hide and seek? You can't catch me. Nah, 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 nah. Now you see me, now you don't. Right? And how that works in a fallen system with the technology that they came up with. But Asha Diane was very right when she talked about, and this is one of the reasons why I've cried so much throughout my entire life. Okay? Is that even though I have experienced an enormous amount of abuse as a result thereof, of trauma, just massive trauma every day that you're experiencing as a polarity integrator, that if you can't maintain what it is you're aware of, which is what you know that you are in energy, which is what love is that goes on forever, it can consume you. And that's what it tries to do. So it goes after your central nervous system. It goes after the central nervous system of this planet. Every living organism is a target that represents living light, which is God's love. All right? So that's like mama's nipple. See, that little baby that was born into creation doesn't want to let go of that nipple. All right? So in some ways you can scale us up to killing off all the clan mothers and why and what it means when Patty Broussard said, the native spirits here, if you will, the genetic engineering that went into guardians, right, as teachers, peacekeepers, and healers. So you realize when you throw this into the learning curve speed, they're going after God's teachers, which is going after God's children. So you realize that at some point in time, they end up going back to God. Because they forgot. They forgot who God is. Right? So they'll experience God at some point in time. Right? So they're living on borrowed time, which is borrowed light. right? Which is known as the reserves, or if you will, finite light. So that means that in many ways its future is already known because it's self-destructive. So a lot of times I remember on one blurb, I can't remember who it was, it doesn't matter. They said, listen, you don't need any help from us, just like the folks in this room. They don't need any help from me. They're already doing a good enough job, okay, to lose what it is they're aware of in energy, which is themselves energy, to go bye-bye. They don't need any help. So what ends up happening is that it's very easy, to be the finger pointer, okay, and point out to them what's the programming, okay, which means they're programmed to self-destruct. So they accommodate that program by pushing those buttons. So they push their own buttons, right? Just like the buttons on a dial phone. Numbers and letters are energy, and codes are letters, and codes are software. So they're running software that's meant to self-destruct. So they're running those codes. So the computer that they're running is meant to self-destruct because they're running self-destructive codes that they cannot correct. Okay. So you see how that works with genetic engineers targeting certain races so that happens. See? And you can see how that works when it comes to what? Competition over control over the gates. They want control over the codes to get the codes so they control the gates because they live in fear of having somebody else control the gates. Gate crashers, that's what I call them, gate crashers. Heaven's gate, crashing God's gates. Crashing heaven's gates. See, it's sort of like when Hillary Clinton said that one time, if I can't get my way, I'm going to collapse it all. And what are we observing through what we're experiencing? The evidence of that, right? So you know that the guardian's got to protect the all creation, so that's what we do. Right? Because they realize that there's got to be some help support, some tech support out there. Tech support operators, software tech support operators. Right? That exists somewhere out there in the cosmos that can come in to get the work done without being interrupted or interfered with. Because they simply don't run that fast. They don't operate on that level. Right? So that obviously means God would need guardians, right? To protect the all creation. And then that's sort of counterintuitive when you realize, wait a second, it began with what love is it? Love is goes on forever. I'm not supposed to experience this. I'm not supposed to experience any competition between units of consciousness that want to control things. Right? God is not holding anything captive. God is giving away energy to everything. So it becomes counter space, which is counterintuitive between one and the other, knowing one and the other, knowing one from the other, knowing a deadlight magnet, which is fallen consciousness that is not experiencing what love is. So it fell. So this is where love, compassion, and empathy automatically kick in, right? And so that's why I've known ever since I was a kid, that even though they're abusing me in all kinds of ways, okay, I can't ever lose what it is that I know that I am, which is an eternal God connection to experience eternal unconditional love. Right? Otherwise, I lost. I fell with them. Right? So how are you going to be able to heal anybody else or restore the universe, what you know is true, if you can't restore yourself? From whence we all began, out of what love is. So restoring me is restoring you. Restoring you is restoring me. Now we're all one again. So it sort of becomes an oxymoron that even though I think of it as borrowed time, the cosmos naturally cycles in such a way that we experience that. Out of the amount of love and compassion that the eternal source from which it all began has, for all creation, which is all units of consciousness that exist within the all creation, to experience what love is, because that's what I experienced, to know that. And that makes it easy, because it means we have had the eternal blessing to have experienced that. Because I don't know of anything more beautiful than experience what it's like to experience being loved. And how beautiful the universe is to experience when you're experiencing that in your mirror. But they don't experience that in the mirror. So for me, it's been what we call the art of communication. Because healing arts is the art of communication. Communicating the energy, which is communicating with our consciousness, the energy that represents what love is, so that through our antenna and their antenna, they're picking up God's signal, which is a love vibration that goes on forever, because it's real living light. It's not fake. It's not a dead light magnet. It's a real living eternal light magnet. And that's the gift, which is the eternal spirit of fire. It's on fire to love all creation, so that we're all experiencing being one in love with each other, because we're experiencing the love that we have for each other through the one. Have a great day. I love you all. Be good yourselves.